A 16-year-old girl materializes a 200-year-old spirit to be photographed by England's foremost scientist on this episode of Spectralities. Welcome to Spectralities. My name's Rick Garrett, and I'm a photographer exploring the point where photography and the occult overlap. In the last episode, we discussed William Mumler, who used photography as a tool to document spirits that could not be seen with the naked eye. In this episode, we enter new territory, using a camera to record a spirit that is fully materialized for all to see. Specifically, a spirit named Katie King, who appeared in the 1870s and allowed her photograph to be taken under scientific scrutiny. I recently gave lectures on the history of esoteric photography in Cleveland, Chicago, and Seattle. When I got to this subject, in the first two lectures, I explained to people that people at the time became somewhat obsessed with Katie King. By the third lecture, I had to admit that I'd also become obsessed. In fact, I've started to work on a few projects of my own, art projects related to Katie King, and I'll be announcing some of those later. But right now, what's all the excitement about? Well, by the time the spiritualist movement made it across the Atlantic Ocean, it had begun to change. American seances started focusing on revelations from the spirit world through trance mediumship, with physical proofs such as table tipping. In England, seance goers began to anticipate more tangible displays. This kind of started in America, but then by the time it gets to England, there become reports of full-blown materializations by the 1860s, in which the full body of a spirit appears to a captivated audience. This happens in part because of a back and forth between the spiritualist movement and photography. Originally, spirit photographers such as William Mumler used the medium of photography to validate the belief in the unseen. This grows until both spiritualists and critics demand more physical proofs from the spirits. In this way, the medium of photography causes spiritualism to embrace a type of materialism. Our story begins in Ohio in 1850, when a couple of very unique and powerful spirits make their presence known. First, there was John King, who in his earthly days had been known as the Welsh buccaneer Henry Morgan. Morgan had done some pretty nasty things in his life and explained that he was making up for this by doing good deeds in his spirit form. Soon, communications come through John's daughter, Katie King, reportedly known as Annie Owen Morgan while alive. While John was known to be more stoic, Katie was impish and unpredictable. She might reveal truths about the spirit world, or she might just play practical jokes. In 1872, the spirit of Katie King appeared in London and was photographed by Frederick Hudson. This was part of his collaborative work with spiritualist artist Georgiana Houghton and included in her book, Chronicles of Spirit Photography. As an aside, if you're not familiar with Houghton's mediumistic artwork, you should definitely check that out because it is astounding. Where Katie King really got her own voice and following was through the mediumship of a London girl by the name of Florence Cook. After a seance with some friends, Florrie exhibited remarkable mediumistic potential. With the help of older, more experienced mediums, she began holding seances and improved her skills. At first, the spirits' voices could be heard, along with poltergeist phenomena. In the summer of 1872, Florence was able to manifest the first physical appearance of Katie King, who appeared as a kind of a deathly head coming out of some curtains. In May of 1873, William Harrison was able to photograph Katie King over the course of a few seances at the home of Florence Cook's family. While the spirits were generally not fond of bright lights, Katie became slightly accustomed to the magnesium flash. She even held a lamp for the camera to be focused and posed for the camera, which she called a queer machine. At one point, a photograph was taken, and the spirit ran after the photographer going to develop the glass plate negative, as she was so anxious to see the resulting photograph of herself. As with the photographs by William Mumler in the last episode, this was still so early that the newspapers of the time had to have artists recreate the photographs as woodcuts in order to be printed in the publications. So for around half a year or so, things seemed to be going pretty well. Florence's powers as a medium increase, and people excitedly attend seances in which Katie King materializes, walks around, and has a conversation, while Florence is sequestered behind some curtains. This is getting quite a lot of publicity in many of the spiritualist newspapers of the day. And then things are interrupted by the Volkmann affair. On December 9, 1873, during a seance, the spirit of Katie King took the hand of a sitter by the name of William Volkmann. This was common, but on this night, Volkmann decided to grab a hold of Katie. The gas lamps were quickly extinguished as a struggle broke out, with the spirit ripping out part of Volkmann's beard before dashing off. Volkmann's chased out of the house, and it's revealed that Florence is still tied to the chair. A debate breaks out that more scientific conditions need to be employed at seances. Enter William Crookes. William Crookes was a largely self-taught scientist who had made a name for himself by discovering the element thallium in 1861. He did a lot of research regarding optical physics, but was basically an all-around genius. He was the editor of the Quarterly Journal of Science, along with journals on photography. He also invented the Crookes tube, a predecessor of the cathode ray tube. In 1895, the Crookes tube would play a key role in the discovery of X-rays by Wilhelm Röntgen. This is fitting, as this allowed the invisible to be seen and photographed. In 1867, Crookes was devastated when his brother died at the age of 21 and began attending seances with the hope of contacting his brother. Crookes began scientific studies of mediums, and some of his scientific peers are so sure that he's going to prove spiritualism to be a fraud that they publish glowing endorsement for his work before he even starts. Just a few weeks after the Volkmann affair threatened the credibility of Florence Cook's mediumship, Crookes begins to investigate the Katie King materializations. He attends a number of seances, and in February of 1874, less than 2 months after beginning his investigation of Florence Cook's mediumship, Crookes publishes the first report and vouches for Florence publicly. He defends Florence and denounces her detractors for attacking such a young, sensitive, innocent woman. At this point, he declares that he'll dedicate the next several months to a series of intimate seances and will report his findings. Florence stays with the Crookes family for weeks at a time, conducting regular seances where both she and Katie are subjected to various tests. As this continues, both Florence and the spirit of Katie become almost like members of the family. Katie King would manifest and gather the Crookes children around and tell them stories about her travels to places like India. In April, William Crookes boldly announces that he's obtained absolute proof of the validity of Florence Cook's mediumship and the materialization of Katie King. Almost immediately after this, Katie King announces that she'll be terminating her materializations through Florence Cook with an intense series of final seances over a 3-week period. It was during these final sittings that Katie King allowed Crookes to photograph her. Over several different settings, Crookes would set up 5 different cameras at the same time. Some were suitable for larger negatives, some for smaller, and even 2 stereoscopic cameras. This was before the innovations that would allow a photographer to sync their flash to the shutter. So Crookes got around this by essentially turning the entire seance into a dark room. Glass plates would be prepared and put into cameras. The lights would be extinguished and the lens caps removed from the cameras. As the room was darkened, no image was recorded until the flash was set off, and all cameras would record an image simultaneously. These were then developed. All the while, Katie King walked around and posed for cameras while her medium sat writhing with her head wrapped in a shawl. In all, 44 different photographs were obtained in this way. For whatever reason, Crookes later destroyed these photographs. We can only speculate as to why, but some of the images had been disseminated, and they proved to be so significant that spiritualist magazines 30 years later contained advertisements where you could send away for these photographs. Regarding the photographs, Crookes himself said that photography was not adequate to depict the perfect beauty of Katie's face. And this leads to an interesting point. As I mentioned in the introduction, everyone seemed completely enchanted by this spirit, Katie King. She had this charming, potentially seductive allure. There are accounts of various socialites kissing Katie or squeezing her waist, searching for corset stays. Katie would sit on the lap of seance goers, kissing them on the cheek or leaving them ribbons or locks of hair. Some 20th century critics speculated that Crookes may have been gullible, in part because he was having an affair with the ghost of Katie King. Which makes you wonder, is it adultery if one party is a ghost? But the honest truth is that by all accounts, Crookes was happily married, and he was by no means the only person of authority to vouch for her from these sittings. It's such an unusual story that to this day, people have tried to understand why a scientist like William Crookes would give such endorsements to a young medium. Was he gullible? Was he in love with Florence or the ghost, Katie? Was he going blind and therefore susceptible to trickery? Or did Florence Cook genuinely have the ability to manifest a spirit physically? These would be hotly debated in spiritualist circles for at least the next 100 years. It's been said by some that this case became something of the cornerstone of the spiritualist religion. The appearance of Katie King was said by some reverends to give credence to the biblical event of Christ's resurrection. After the final appearance of Katie King through the mediumship of Florence Cook, William Crookes continued with both his scientific and psychical research. He became the president of the Society of Psychical Research in 1886, which is especially interesting because that means he was simultaneously the president of both the Society of Psychical Research and the British Association. Basically, he was the head of the most prominent associations of both metaphysics and science. Crookes was knighted for his scientific achievements in 1897. At different times, he was a member of both the Theosophical Society and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and was briefly a magical student of Eliphas Levi. So he continued with science and magic, the occult, in different ways for most of the rest of his life. Florence Cook, on the other hand, had a kind of weird life. She secretly got married shortly before the final seances involving Katie King. She had a tumultuous marriage, and both her husband and mother seemed intent on running different scams to get money. A younger sister of hers briefly became a medium specializing in materializations. Florence had a few other forays into mediumship, but as promised, Katie King never returned through her. But that isn't the end of Katie King. Similar to the way that Katie King existed and manifested before the mediumship of Florence Cook, she continued after. Over the next 60 years alone, she would appear in the United States and England and be photographed in France and Canada. But these are stories for another time. If you enjoyed this video, please like it below and share with your friends. Also, I would love comments and questions, so please let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.